Forum Communications Company is proud to be a part of the Trust Project. Learn more at thetrustproject.org. Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes, empowering our vehicles, to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. I'm Rob Port. Happy to be with you this Monday. Hey, sorry, we skipped some episodes last week. First of all, I was kind of ill the first part of the week, and then the second part of the week, I don't know. I just kind of gave up. So we're restarting the podcast again this week. Not restarting, but we're getting back on track with episodes, and got a good episode coming up. We're going to talk about regional haze and a debate about that. North Dakota has some of the cleanest air in the nation, but as you know, there's a constant debate about environmental regulations and balancing that with our need to produce power, and obviously the impact on our, very carbon-heavy industries here in the state of North Dakota. We're going to talk about that in the second part of the show. To start off, I'm going to be speaking with a gentleman who's running for the city commission in Fargo. He is the director of equity and inclusion at Moorhead Area Public Schools, but even though he works in Moorhead, he lives in Fargo. Matur Alir, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on. Thanks, happy to have you.
Thank you, Rob, for having me, and I hope you're feeling better now after being ill for a couple of weeks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I got one of those spring colds. Wasn't so much fun. Let's talk about, first of all, how do you stand out? There are 15 people running for the city commission in Fargo. First of all, why are so many people running this year, do you think? And second of all, how do you stand out as a candidate in that big of a field?
It's a good question. How I stand out is, know that we will have 15. We have 15 candidates, so definitely we'll have 13 losers there. And I wouldn't take it well being one of the 13. And how I stand out is, it's also, I have lived in Fargo for quite 8 years now. I have fell in love with it, and I love my neighborhoods, and I just think that the city leadership kind of failed everybody in the city, and that's why a lot of people are running, and to that, the special assessment are skyrocketing. And when I go around talking to my neighbors, they always talk about it. And two, let me route you back. I work as a director of equity and inclusion for Moorhead Public School. I also, prior to that, I had worked for about 7 years with Cass County Social Services as a social worker, processing application for needy families. And to that, that job kind of opened my eyes to when people say, "Oh, they can't work; they just wanted to benefit from the government." That's so wrong. And to that, my understanding was the barrier to workforce at that time, and it is the childcare and transportation. Like, say you have one child, like a baby, and you wanted to go to work, you might want to find a daycare, and if the daycare charging you $1,200 a month. Depend on how much you're making, divide that toward your bills, like your rent, your other expenses, living expenses, and then the childcare. You're barely making nothing to live on, and you rely on those government services. And I think other part is the transportation. You don't have access to public transportation that is on time. So if you have to get to work, you got to leave like 2 hours early, and then you get home 2 hours late, and I kind of feel like it's wrong. Talking to these people, some people are hardworking people that I have got a chance to know, because I had some time that we're like processing these applications, and you know what the government support these people or is close to zero, close to nothing. So Rapport, if you come in like the Cass County Social Services and seeking assistance, the only thing you get if you have zero income is $192 to buy food for 1 month. I don't think, to me, I don't think that will be enough at all. So or rather just go out and get work. So to that, I wanted to solve the workforce issues. And when we have workforce issues, we'll have more people buying home and we'll have more taxes coming through. My other topic is to end spatial assessment, especially if I can't end it all completely. We might be able to exempt our senior citizen or the people that are living on fixed income like SSI. And to that, their incomes are not going up, but the cost of living just keep going up. It just keep going up. Other issue is to the tie to affordable housing. It's not just spatial assessment, but rent. Rent is skyrocketing now. And to my talk yesterday with the people that live in that work in downtown, they can't afford to live in downtown. And if you have been to downtown and see what's going on there, it's looking beautiful, but it's unaffordable to the people that actually work there. So those are the issues that I'm talking about with you today. And I also wanted to retreat you back to your article.
Okay.
Your article was out of control, I think, to say, and I got a chance to reach out to you. And sure. I think the forum in general took everything out of content. I did not say it was.
Well, let's provide some of that context for people listening who maybe weren't following that. There was some controversy, some disagreement over the United Republican Committee, the URC. They're kind of the overall arching Republican committee for Cass County. They've been holding some forums with candidates. They held a forum. They invited not all of the candidates. Two of the people not invited were yourself and another candidate, both of whom happen to be black men. In the Barry Amundson article, he attributed a quote to you calling the decision racist. Now, in my column, taking Barry's report at face value, I objected to the idea that it was racist. As somebody who's been involved in organizing events like that, it's hard to get 15 people on stage at the same time. I don't even know how useful that sort of an event is for the public, that many people all trying to talk about their, very complicated issues in their campaigns at once. So I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes we get a little carried away with those sorts of accusations, and I took exception to what was reported, you making it. Now, you took exception saying you didn't call it racist. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so this is what happened, okay? On May 4th, on the afternoon, they had a United Republican forum. Okay, I had no clue that exists. So in the afternoon, the same day, around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we had the Chambers of Commerce host the candidate forum where they invited all the candidates to be there. At that time, we had 13 candidates. Okay, at the opening, I had no clue that the United Republican had a forum at all. So at the opening, Dave Popcorn brought it up that today we had United Republican Forum, and I am so sorry that the only two people that were not invited were Ahmet and Mature. Okay, to my understanding, I asked who else wasn't invited in this forum, and all the 11 that were there were invited, and they had participated. And out of 13, it was just me and Ahmet. And to that day, later on, there was a question regarding, is the Fargo equitable and diverse and inclusive? My answer to that was the Fargo is diverse now, and it will continue to be diverse. Are the resources being equitably distributed across? I said, no, they are not. And is Fargo inclusive? Because I broke it down into 3 different words. And it says, is Fargo inclusive? I said, no, Fargo is not inclusive. And the forum that had happened today, that I and Ahmet were not invited, is the prime example how we all can be inclusive. To my understanding, knowing that the race is non-partisans. Okay, is non-partisans. I am good friend with some Republican, some people like I had Ed Schaefer. We hang out most of the time. Those are
I
the
like
people
Ed
I
too.
know. Yes, and to my at the end, the forum went out and say 2 black men were not invited. That was the article I read. I said it's okay. It's nothing. And when people talk about racism, like when people talk about racism, the only people that get hurt are the minority, because it is a critical conversation that most people are not comfortable to take on.
Yeah. I
And to a
think,
person like me, I think your article kind of hurt me a lot than not just being invited.
yeah.
You know, I didn't have problem not being invited at all. But if we are inviting people, we all know that this is a nonpartisan race. It has nothing to do with endorsement from
Well, yeah,
Republicans
you
or
can. I mean, if you want to criticize like, why is a Republican committee hosting forums in a nonpartisan? And I have kind of a problem with nonpartisan. I think it's a fiction. The idea that the people participating are nonpartisan, that they don't have their own ideologies and everything. Maybe they don't affiliate with a party. I don't know. But I mean, listen, everybody has their ideologies, and I do think that political parties and political affiliations serve a purpose in helping us categorize candidates in our minds. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to discern, which candidate is which. I think it serves a purpose. I know people don't like to hear it, but I think there's a purpose, and I think I don't know what criteria the URC used when they decided which candidates were involved. I wasn't party to that process. I don't know. What I objected to was a suggestion that skin color was a criteria. I thought that was the evidence for that was not in evidence.
No, and the video is there, and anybody objecting that can
Sure.
can listen clearly to that recording of the forum where I said we need to do more to be inclusive.
Sure.
And I did say that if that's taken out,
I think
out of content as racist, you can
Well,
translate it however you want it to.
Okay.
But we need
Well,
to be inclusive. Either we are Democrat or Republican.
Sure.
We need to be inclusive, and that's where I kind of feel like your article hurt me. But no. Other thing too, I reached out to Doug Charbonneau, the guy who was doing the invitation.
Right.
I called him, and for due to his respect, I asked him, and he said, "We're only inviting Republican." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. How do you know that I'm not Republican? Because this is nonpartisan." I had both at some point that I had both Republican.
I got some emails like that too, and I mean they must have been looking at the candidates and trying to discern. These candidates align with what we think of as a Republican ideology, and these don't. I don't know. That's for them to decide. To my mind, and I wanted to ask you this, I think one of the biggest challenges when we talk about race and we try to achieve a goal that I think you and I share, which is inclusiveness. Like everybody gets to participate in our society, in our culture, hopefully in our prosperity, and it shouldn't matter what your skin color is, your religion is, or anything like that. I think one of the obstacles sometimes is trust. And it becomes very, very hard to engage when, a mere disagreement might be recast as something more nefarious like bigotry, right? I think that's a real obstacle that we have because we've become... And again, not accusing this, and this is why I wrote the column. I guess this is my way of trying to explain why I wrote what I did and why I objected to it, at least the way it was presented. I'm so glad that you're able to offer a more fulsome explanation. One thing that really worries me is we get so trigger happy with imputing nefarious motivations to things that we disagree with that it's hurting us, and it's hurting our ability to come together and be inclusive. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And mostly when we distance ourselves around conversation about racism or races in the way that people interpret it, it kind of holds us back from learning how racism hurt or how it's not hurt and how can we all approach it. That's so different. Then where I came from with my daily job, I reach out across the aisle, even to the people that I do not agree with. with people that do not look like me. Me calling somebody that hasn't invited me, I am on Chris Burke's show most of the time. People understand him being a person that don't like people that look like me, and I said that's wrong. That's not true. I had dinner with Chris Burke. We hang out, and he's helping me. It's not because he hasn't connected with people. Like, people haven't got a chance to know somebody enough. People might have different opinion about you as Rob, but me talking to you today and learning or understanding what you have written, it give me a different perception that if somebody says something bad, I say, Rob, no, it's not that. It's not bad.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. I
think when we reach out and talk to other people, the other thing that I want you to do is we need to rewrite that article.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah,
well, I mean, part of I'm kind of relying on Barry Amundsen's, but I'll tell you what, I will definitely link back to that article, and we'll have a full explanation with this podcast. And maybe I'll add a link to this podcast saying, listen, if you want to hear the full explanation, here it is. Let's shift gears, though, and talk a little bit about your campaign. Okay. One thing that I really like about it, and here's one thing I don't like in general. I hate it when local campaigns for things like city commission or county commission or even like the state legislature or even some of our statewide offices, they become about national issues, right? So you have like I don't know if you remember this last cycle, we had a Republican primary between two candidates who were running to be state treasurer of North Dakota. And for some reason, that race became about abortion, right? The state treasurer has nothing to do with abortion, right? Whatever your feelings about it, you're pro-choice, you're pro-life, whatever, the treasurer doesn't do anything with abortion. No. So why are we talking about that? So one thing I really liked is when I asked you what your campaign was about, you talked about some very specific Fargo issues. You're talking about special assessments. You're talking about childcare. You're talking about transportation. Can we just start and say that's refreshing in and of itself to have a campaign that's about issues that matter to Fargo and not these national issues that become a distraction?
That's true. That's the only way I'm looking at it. And when I look at it, when I say workforce, we all wanted to work. Either you're Democrat, Republican, white or black or anybody. We all need to work. And when we all work, we lived an American dream. Let me go back and tell you about myself. I had lived in a refugee camp for 10 years. I left South Sudan when I was 7 and went to Ethiopia and lived there for 10 years. When I was 17, I was sponsored and I came to America right outside Philadelphia. I had to go to school, learn English, and graduated high school in a year and went to Penn State University and graduated. Last week, I also just got my master's in educational leadership, and I got admitted to the doctoral program. So July 27, I'll be starting my doctoral, and within 3 years, I'll be doctor. But today, I own a home in South Fargo. I came with nothing. I own a home. I work my way in. I work up every day. My body hurt to go to work, but I have to do it. It's because I wanted to live an American dream. And to that, it showed me that what I had went through is not good, but what I'm living now is good. So I wouldn't do anything to risk all of that. So to my understanding, I'm the one living the American dream because I truly understand what the American dream is. And if everybody have job, they can live an American dream.
I think I agree with that so much. And you and I might disagree on how we get there, right? Like what's the right policy for promoting prosperity and opportunity and everything. But we definitely share the same goal. And one thing, because we've been having such a debate too about the way we talk about this country. And I think it's one side who thinks that if you're waving the flag and you're patriotic, then you're ignoring the ugly parts of our history. Obviously slavery and that we didn't allow women to vote for a long time and a lot of those things. And then there's the other side who thinks, well, if we talk about the ugly things that are a part of our history, like slavery, like women's suffrage, like a lot of the way we treated Native Americans, if we talk about those things, then we're saying America's a bad place or a terrible place. And I think it's so much more nuanced like that. Like you can love America for what it is and what it aspires to be while also recognizing all of the terrible mistakes that we've made in the past. Like you can do both of these things simultaneously. And I wish more people realize that.
Yeah, a lot of people should realize that even if you have to love in America for just one thing that you agree with, will make America great. Will make America a good place to live in. Like I came in, I was let in as a refugee. And within 2 months, I was able to have a job and work. And before that, I had people that didn't know and that I have nothing in common but humanity helping me for the first 2 months, not a government. So if that's going to have you build a heat, and then you some kind of a person, not so good of a person to say, but knowing that whatever you believe in, it has nothing to do with our city leadership. A city leadership make more impactful decision about people that live there than the federal government.
So let's
make a decision about the water that we drink that have nothing to do with our difference. How much taxes that we pay that has nothing to do with our differences. Those are the unique thing that we should all focus on, whether you're Democrat or Republican or you believe in gay or believe in abortion or not. All of these are the things that are important that our city leadership control, and not dwell on the thing that we do not have control over. Like the last forum we had where should we legalize marijuana? I think that's a state issues.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So those are not the city leadership issues. City leadership issues are like the boundaries, the water, the sewage. Is the snow being clean?
Let me drill down. Let's drill down on one of the issues you brought up. Let's talk about childcare, because I think this is not just a challenge for Fargo. This is a challenge statewide in North Dakota, because we see inflation. I mean, especially right now, it's been a challenge for a long time, but right now inflation's going up. Right, grocery bills are getting higher, fuel bills are getting higher, utility bills are getting higher. So that's putting more pressure on North Dakotans need to work, and I don't know anybody out there, unless they're like independently wealthy. If it's like a 2-parent household, mom and dad both got to work. That's just the reality. But if mom and dad are both working, that means somebody's got to watch the kids. And if somebody's got to watch the kids, that is hugely expensive. So that's the world that we're living in right now. And I think we can all agree the state, the government, whether it's the city government or the state government, should probably have a role in facilitating access to childcare. But to my mind, how do you do that? I mean, because I don't necessarily like the idea of just outright paying for it or subsidizing it. I struggle with that, because that's going to put upward pressure on taxes and everything else. The approach that I like is, let's look at some of the regulations that are around starting a childcare business. It is very, very hard to start a childcare business in the state of North Dakota. And North Dakota is a particularly, generally, we're a pretty friendly place to start a business, but it's not easy. And I remember not so long ago, the Fargo City Commission was talking about, they were going to regulate the type of juice that childcare centers could. I think that's kind of the approach. Is there some of these regulations that some of the red tape that we could cut to make that easier? Anyway, that's what I look at it. What's your approach? How do we fix? I mean, you've identified that childcare is a problem. What does the city government do about it?
It is way expensive to take your child to the child care, and the reason is more to do with the safety of the child. There's a lot of background check, and those are good. We wanted to have a safe place for our children to be at, but the regulation is what I was saying is they're giving more incentive to big developers that don't even need those incentives. But if we can incentivize the child care, they are small businesses.
Right.
We need to help them as well.
Sure.
If we're going to give incentive, which means they're going to have more children at that daycare, and whoever is going to put the children at daycare need to go to work, and in return, they will be paying more taxes back to the city. So saying that we have a mutual benefit right there.
Sure.
The parents are able to work, and the other issue is that it is dividing families. Families have to juggle different schedules to dad working in the evening, mom working in the morning, never had a chance to have a family dinner at a time. So those are the issue, and how it is pretty expensive. Like myself, I have 8 kids, and I don't take them to the daycare. My wife stay at home. I have a good job, so I can cover most of our bills. We can try to find some extra money if she's able to work and have an affordable childcare, because the rest of the kid goes to school and we have one at home. But to that, so I think it's an issue that need all of us at the table. I want to just solve it as the
Sure.
city commission, but I will solve it having the daycare providers at the table,
Sure.
having the parents at the table. Even if we can set up like a neighborhood childcare center,
So,
or give access to the family member to be able to provide childcare. Like if you have a sister that live in town and you say, okay, get a license, you can watch my kid and I'll be able to pay you in a paramount price. So they watching their own relative and then they know they're being compensated for it. Or have a grandma that's
Sure.
retired, have a childcare license and provide those services at home
So-
at a reasonable price. I think that will cut down the price.
when you were talking about incentives, what is that? Like you said, we give incentives to developers, and I agree, we do. We do that across the state, Fargo and a lot of other places. There are people getting incentives that don't need them. And in fact, they go on the record sometimes saying they don't need them. So when you're talking about incentives for like you talking about like TIF, like what are you talking about? Like what is it? What does an incentive look like?
Like the incentive they're talking about, like it's okay to have incentive if it's going to provide a mutual benefit to our city. Like I like the incentive that they give to first time home buyers, where you get a tax break for the first 2 years, and then from there you picked it up. So I think if we're providing those to the people that are studying the childcare, and when we provide them incentive, make sure they have like make the first month free, which is the biggest issue. The biggest issue is paying the down payment for the first month. You have to pay a down payment like you're renting a home. But if you haven't worked, you don't have any income. So if they provide a down payment for the first month, and then the parent get a break for the first month, and then they work for that month and save up enough to pay for the next month, I think that will do it.
Have you heard from people? This is something I hear all the time, and what leads me to believe that a lot of this problem is regulatory, statewide, is the number of people who are taking their children to what are quote unquote illegal daycares, which is to say, they're dropping their kid off with a neighbor who's watching a lot of kids in the neighbor, and probably they should be registered as a child care center, but they're not. Now, obviously, in these instances, the parents are satisfied that their kids are safe. What parent is going to drop their kid off someplace that they don't feel that they're safe? But to me, I know a lot of people who take their kids to unregulated daycares, illegal daycares, whatever you want to call them, that are doing it because it's cheaper. It's cheaper. To me, that illustrates, like when we outlawed alcohol, right? And what happened? We created a black market for alcohol, and all these people rushed in. We kind of have a black market for daycare. And I say this not disparaging the people who are doing that, because I understand why it's happening, and they're not evil, bad people or anything. But to me, I look at that and it's like, boy, that really illustrates the problem, that somebody is obviously willing to provide childcare services, but not in a way that's licensed and regulated and everything, because all of that is so arduous and so expensive, it makes it impossible for them to provide the service.
I think I wouldn't call it illegal, because I
struggle with that term too.
So say like I have my mother around.
Yeah.
So when I need to go somewhere with my wife, we just leave the kid with her.
Well, that's different, right? That's like a family member babysitting is different. I'm talking about like there's a lady who lives 2 blocks over, and she's watching, kids from 4 or 5 different families, and she doesn't have a daycare license. That's probably illegal, but I understand why it's happening too.
Yeah. I would say, I don't know. I'm struggling with that too, calling it illegal.
I am.
Maybe the helping hand.
Sure.
Let's call it a helping hand. So like.
But how do we facilitate more
not
of
like
that?
Regularly constant.
Sure. But how do we empower? Because I'm always really interested. How do we empower people to solve problems for themselves? Right. And to me, that's one way. How do we do that? And I think that's one thing is if that lady got caught caring for those kids, you and I may not like to call it illegal, because I don't want to cast this person like they're a criminal, but what she's doing is not in keeping with the law, and maybe that's the problem, I guess, is the argument that I'm trying to make.
Yes, I think somehow it will be a problem to the state or the regulator that or regulating that. But knowing that, I had helped with some people to get their childcare license when I work as a social worker. All you need to know is have a safe place, and we have a social worker that will come to check out the place, like where they will take a nap, what they will be eating, and also you will wanted to know how to do a CPR license. You have to get a CPR certificate. Sure. So it's not as bad to get the license.
Okay.
So in North Dakota, but I think other states it's hard to get the license. But if some people are doing that, I think it'd be better to just get a daycare or get the license. You can do it at your own house.
Yeah.
Or home
but
daycare.
Some of it's not just
limited to the number of children.
But it's not just it's the insurance and everything. And then if you want to try to have employees, that's a whole other ball of wax. It's difficult. Anyway, hey, we're up against it. We're out of time. Matur, I appreciate it. Before you go, tell us where people can find out more about your campaign.
You can find me at maturalier.com. It's MATUORALIER.com. You can read more about me there. You reach out to me where you can have a phone call or however you want it to. If you want me to answer any question, email me as well or give me a call.
Matur, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. And it's approval voting, so when you get a chance.
Yeah, that's right. I always forget.
If you have a two favorite candidate, you can make me your third choice or your fourth choice.
Weirdos in Fargo doing that's a whole other thing. We'll talk about approval voting some other time. I'm not sure I'm keen on it, but that's how Fargo's doing it. So it's about voting for all the people you like and not voting for any of the ones you don't like. Matur, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Well, we just finished up our interview with Matur Alier, who is running for the Fargo City Commission. Interesting guy, and always like hearing. Those local races just don't get enough coverage, and they're important too. They matter. That's where the rubber meets the road. But now we're going to switch, and we're going to talk about a regional issue. In fact, that's right in the name. It's regional haze, which is important for the state of North Dakota because we have a lot of industries that impact emissions. We have coal plants, we have oil and gas production, we have agriculture is even sometimes that gets skipped over. We only think of oil and coal when we think about this stuff, but agriculture is a big part of this as well. In North Dakota, we have some of the cleanest air in the nation. It's without question. We do a very good job of it. Despite our carbon heavy industries, we have very clean air here in the state of North Dakota. But there is a little bit of a food fight going on between the state of North Dakota and the National Park Service, and it's about reducing regional haze. It's about the EPA's regional haze program. Now, again, our state regulators from the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality are pointing out that we have reduced total emissions from coal-fired power electricity in North Dakota by 102,000 tons of sulfur dioxide. That's a 72% reduction, a 55% reduction in nitrogen oxide. These are the two emittents that we're talking about when we're talking about regional haze. But the National Park Service says we're not doing enough. Anyway, here to talk with me about all of that is Mac McGuffey. He is an attorney. He specializes in the Clean Air Act, and he is representing the North Dakota Lignite Energy Council. Mac, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Did I get all that right? This stuff gets so complicated sometimes, and so when I'm talking about it, am I understanding the debate right, what's going on right now?
Yeah, that's basically right. You've got a state there, North Dakota, that has the cleanest air in the country. It's one of only 4 states, in fact, that has never violated any of EPA's health-based standards. But health-based standards are not all that the Clean Air Act requires states to do. They also require them to look at a number of other different issues, and one of those is visibility in national parks and wilderness areas, what we call Class 1 areas. And so the Clean Air Act says to states, you must make reasonable progress in eliminating man-made impairment of visibility so that folks visiting those areas can see the sites they've come to see. And so that is actually the focus of the Regional Haze Program. And it is one that has been very contentious because you do have the federal government, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, certainly seeing things a little bit different than many states and definitely different than North Dakota has seen in the past.
So tell us about that, because what specifically is going on right now? There's a public comment period. What's the debate over right now? Because I know it's the National Park Service, and obviously North Dakota's big skin in the game with this is our absolute gem of a national park, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and there's concern about haze visibility there. But what specifically is going on right now?
So right now, we're in a particular phase of the program where the state is preparing a plan for how it will improve visibility in those national parks and Theodore Roosevelt National Park, as well as Lost Wood Wilderness Area. But the way the program works is that every 10 years, the state has to come up with one of these plans, then submit that plan to the US EPA for approval. If EPA does not like what they see in the plan, they don't think it was thought through properly, they think it should include additional control measures, then EPA can disapprove it and replace it with its own plan. And that's a little bit of what happened in what was already round one of this program, which was between 2008 and 2018. In that round of the program, North Dakota wrote a plan. EPA disagreed with what was in that plan, and so tried to impose a federal plan on top of North Dakota. That eventually went to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. And the Eighth Circuit sort of handed out a bit of a mixed bag of decisions, upholding some of what EPA did, upholding some of what North Dakota did. So now we are in the second round of the program. This program sort of repeats every 10 years. So this is round two, and North Dakota is now writing its second round plan with all of that history behind it.
So, and essentially, they're inviting public comment on that right now, which is important for those of you listening. Let me read you some of the things that the National Park Service is saying. This is from an article written by my colleague, Patrick Springer, back in just last month, just not that long ago. This is what the National Park Service is saying. Of all states, North Dakota has the biggest influence over haze. That was remarkable when I heard that. Why? I mean, obviously, I'm asking you to explain something they said, but that surprised me. Why would they be making that argument? Little North Dakota has the biggest of all the states, has the biggest influence over haze?
Yeah, so it's important to remember what role the National Park Service plays in this process. So they are considered a federal land manager that is given special status with respect to the regional haze program because they're in charge of these Class 1 areas, these national parks and wilderness areas that the program is designed to protect. And so the National Park Service gets an opportunity, a special opportunity to provide comments even before the draft is released to the public. And so that's what you're reading from are the comments that the National Park Service has already sent to DEQ after reviewing a preliminary version of the plan. And what the National Park Service is trying to say is that if you look at the remaining man-made impacts, then they are trying to say that the emissions from North Dakota are greater than you would find from any other man-made sources. Well, the parks are in North Dakota, so that's actually not too much of a surprise. What they miss is that 87% of the impact at Theodore Roosevelt National Park and 80% of the impact of the visibility in Lost Wood Wilderness Area is caused by factors that North Dakota DEQ can't control at all. They're basically natural sources, Canadian sources, and largely wildfires. Really, wildfires are what is driving the haze. Anytime anyone goes to one of these Class 1 areas and is unhappy with the view they're seeing, by and large, that is going to be caused by wildfire. The impact that man-made sources from within North Dakota would actually have on visibility is quite small. And in fact, there's been an analysis that has looked into what would happen if you completely got rid of all the coal-fired power plants. And that would have an impact on the haze of less than 1% with respect to NOx emissions. So really the impact, obviously statistics can be used in a number of different ways, and that's what National Park Service is trying to do here. They want to control what they can, but unfortunately what is controllable is not a real significant portion of the haze that's remaining.
Obviously, I think we all, none of us like when there's wildfires and it's smoky outside, right? That's pretty awful. And we all want clear blue skies. There's nothing about that. It's essentially the lignite industry is saying, listen, North Dakota's doing a good job. Like, we have a good track record. There's no reason to believe that our continued efforts to improve, because that's the other thing people, I think, sometimes forget. There is a constant evolution of improvement in this stuff. And that's why I led with those statistics about a 72% reduction in sulfur dioxide, a 55% reduction in nitrogen oxide. I think sometimes people imagine that we're still running the coal plants like it's the Victorian era, right? And in London fog and all this terrible stuff. And it's not. There has been a constant pattern of improvement to do a better job with this stuff, and that could continue. But I think sometimes politics just weighs in, where there's maybe other motivations that are beyond maybe just haze. Like maybe we just don't like fossil fuels anymore. Is that part of this as well?
I do think it is part of that. But the other thing to keep in mind with the visibility program is the ultimate goal here is a goal set by EPA itself, saying that 2064 is the date by which we want to eliminate all man-made visibility impairment. And if you look at the progress that you were just talking about, that North Dakota has made and is continuing to make, we're actually below the target line of hitting that basically number of zero impact that we're shooting for in 2064 under EPA's program. So yes, the state is continuing to make significant strides. Those huge emission reductions you talked about did not come easy. That was a $2 billion cost in order to make those improvements. And by the way, while the North Dakota EGUs were making those huge improvements that you talked about, Canadian sources weren't doing the same thing. They've only reduced emissions in the same time period by about 20%.
Yeah.
So you have a significant contribution coming from outside the country. You have the wildfires to the west that are really contributing the bulk of the haze that would impact any visitor's view at these parks. And yet, in spite of that, you still see the continued march forward and progress that North Dakota is making. There are additional units that are coming offline, and those additional reductions will already provide the progress that is needed for this planning period. And basically what DEQ is saying is, hey, we're way ahead of schedule. We're over a decade ahead of where EPA says we ought to be. So if there is more progress to make, and certainly there will be in the future, that's what the later phases of this program will allow us to do.
Obviously, the air doesn't care about borders, so what our Canadian friends are doing matters a great bit. The wildfires thing, I wonder if a lot of people listening to this aren't going to say, well, yeah, but, you know, burning fossil fuels contributes to climate change, which creates those wildfires, which creates the regional haze issue. So, you know, what do you say to that argument?
Well, the difficulty there is that even eliminating the fossil fuel industry in this country would not change the trajectory of climate change. That is a global issue. So we need to talk about solutions that are practical, things that we can do today in this country that make a difference. And if the way in which climate change is causing haze to deteriorate in this country, then the wildfires are something that we can address. And that is one thing that DEQ actually noted in their plan, is that the better way to improve haze is to go at the source of the problem. Maybe the source of the problem is somewhat related to climate change, and we can have that argument. But again, that's a global issue. If you want to address fires, there are fire management practices available for helping to deal with that. Again, the problem, though, is most of those fires impacting the visibility in North Dakota's areas are coming from other states. So there has to be a regional effort to make sure those wildfire management practices are employed to address what really is the ultimate problem of haze here.
A lot of the struggle with these issues are jurisdictional, where in the larger sort of climate change debate, I think a lot of times, you know, we pat ourselves on the back for all of our reductions, but meanwhile, we've moved a lot of the stuff that emit, a lot of manufacturing and stuff, we've moved to places like China that clearly do not care as much about these issues as we do here in the United States of America. And so it's like, you know, we approach regional haze regulation for the state of North Dakota as if North Dakota were this monolithic entity that could impact regional haze. And it's not. It's far more complicated than that. But I think the politics of it and even the regulation of it sometimes fails to recognize that, because if we start saying, well, listen, we're going to have to work with Canada, right? We're going to have to work with some of these other places, and that gets tricky because they're this whole other country with a whole other government, and they're sovereign, and they can do their own laws and everything. That gets harder, and so it's easier to just try to make all the progress up in North Dakota, but that's not fair, and I think that's going to hurt us, because then we end up paying all the costs trying to solve a problem that's really impacted far beyond the borders of North Dakota.
Well, and that's exactly right. And you don't have to look any further to see the evidence of that point than the social cost of carbon that has been talked about. I don't know if you've heard about that effort to basically, value what is the benefit of reducing 1 ton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through some of the measures that folks talk about as ways to address climate change. There was an interagency working group over the past several years. It was certainly in the Obama administration, sort of put on hold during the Trump administration, and now it's back in business. And so they have continued to try to value the the benefit of reducing 1 ton of carbon. And in that document, which again is focused on the benefit of these climate change regulations, in that document itself, it specifically says that even if U.S. emissions were to drop to 0 tomorrow, that step would not be enough to avoid substantial climate change. So clearly, I mean, top to bottom, there really is a full recognition when you look into the details that this is an international issue. It's certainly something that has to be addressed in an international way. And one jurisdiction, particularly just a state, not even an entire country, trying to move the needle here, it is really going to be extremely difficult. Certainly, we should all keep an understanding of the concerns in mind and do what we can. But at the same time, we've got to do what makes sense here. And that's actually where the Regional Haze Program makes a lot of sense. Because it is a regional program, not a global program, there is a coordinating group of 15 states in the Western United States that work together on all this. And that's actually where a lot of the grist for the mill that DEQ turned on this plan came from. They worked with these other 15 states collaboratively, came up with the information they need to understand what is a smart policy in these circumstances. And so that's what they've done.
A lot of these policies are getting made in the courts too. I mean, you started out talking about where, this what we're dealing with right now came out of the Eighth Circuit, where the Eighth Circuit kind of said, "Hey, North Dakota, hey, EPA," anyway, that's the whole. I mean, it's so complicated. How should the average North Dakota voter who's looking at this stuff say, "How do I understand this?" I mean, what's the I hate the term dumb down because I think that's unfair, but what's the simplified version of this that I can wrap my arms around and understand?
I think the key points that everyone should be able to understand and that are really important in thinking about this program is first of all, to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. It's visibility. It's how far you can see. We are not talking about health-based standards. There are other programs for that. The Clean Air Act has a myriad of programs that make sure that the air you breathe is safe to breathe. And so that is where those kinds of concerns lie. If you want to talk about whether the air is healthy, and as we've said, North Dakota's air is extremely healthy. It's the cleanest in the country. So just recognizing that this Regional Haze Program is focused on visibility is sort of step one, and also recognizing that it is intentionally a program that looks very far to the future because the goal is aspirational. We're trying to eliminate, according to the statute, all man-made visibility impairment by 2064. So the goal is set far away because it's an extremely difficult thing to think that we will we will basically eliminate all emissions impairing visibility. That's a very, very tall order. So with that context in mind, it's important to recognize the states are in charge of the program, right? The Clean Air Act sets up a partnership between the states and EPA, but nowhere throughout its provisions is it more deferential to the states than in the Regional Haze Program. It very clearly says that the states should be the decision makers because this is an aesthetic program. It is a program focused on how far you can see across Class 1 areas, which is a very important value that, of course, we want to protect. But at the same time, they recognize states are in a better position to make the policy decisions that are needed to address this very long-term and very aspirational goal that we have. And so really, when it comes down to it, what ought to happen when it goes to the court is the states ought to get deference from the court. But what we've seen in the past is that the courts are in the habit of deferring to the federal government, not to the states. And I think that will be the thing to watch when this really comes to a head and we start to see these plans being potentially disapproved and going to court. Will the court defer to the state, which is where Congress has said the authority ought to be, or will they continue to defer to EPA? And that'll be the real key issue to watch.
How important are, because one of the things, I know that your clients and you're asking for the public to weigh in on this, public comments, do they matter that much? That's a terrible, you're saying, well, of course they matter. We're asking you to publicly comment. But I mean, does the courts care what the average member of the public thinks about this?
Actually, the comments are fairly important. They really are for a number of different reasons. Really, first of all, anyone out there might have the idea that helps fill a gap in understanding somewhere. So, if you have, some knowledge about, the situation that you think might be helpful, it's important to get all of that in the administrative record. So number one, we want to make sure we're hearing from everybody. And so that's why the comments are so important in the development of these plans. The other reason is that when it comes down to legal challenges, The only issues that a court can evaluate are those that were already evaluated during the administrative process. And so if there's an issue that is not raised either in comment or considered directly by DEQ, then that's just simply going to be missed, and it can't be part of the court decision at that point. And it can't be part of EPA reviewing it either, which is really where the court decision will focus. The court will decide whether EPA appropriately approved or disapproved the plan. And we pretty much know at this point that almost all of these plans go to court. And so to make sure that we have the best opportunity to look at all of the relevant information and see all of the issues as clearly as possible as it goes through that process, that's where comments come into play. It's important from a legal perspective and just a practical perspective, making sure we've got all the information we need.
In terms of the things that can be considered, do economic impacts matter? Because, I mean, obviously we're talking about, and this is a cosmetic standard, which I say not to diminish it. It's important. Right. I care about Theodore Roosevelt National Park, too. I take my family there all the time. When I climb up on Buck Hill, I want that beautiful vista that we're all used to. So we all want to protect that. But the struggle here obviously is balancing it between the economic impact. Oil, gas, and coal employ a hell of a lot of North Dakotans. Does that matter?
Oh, absolutely it does. And in fact, the statute requires states to consider costs. So the way the statute works at this stage in the program is that states have to impose those control measures that they determine to be necessary to make reasonable progress. And that reasonable progress phrase is a bit of a loaded term, because there is a provision in the statute that says in determining reasonable progress, states must consider cost. Now, what's interesting about that is that in that provision that says states must consider cost in determining what is reasonable progress, it doesn't specifically and expressly say they should also consider the visibility benefit that they will achieve with those costs. And so EPA has seized upon that in the past and said, well, you think you should only look at cost. And if it's cost effective, in other words, if you can afford it, you should go ahead and put on those control measures. Well, reasonable progress has to mean progress towards something. And here, as we've talked about, the goal is improving visibility. And the Supreme Court, not too long ago, has said very clearly and quite honestly, logically, that good government policy comes out of comparing costs and benefits. And so that's what DEQ has done here. They've looked at both the cost and the potential benefits. And what they have seen is that the cost of doing more than what they're already doing, which is significant. Again, as we've talked about, there have been significant reductions, and those reductions are going to continue. There is a plan for continuing to do that. But adding more cost to it isn't actually going to improve visibility by any amount that anyone could see. And so DEQ has done, I think, the right thing of comparing costs and benefits consistent with Supreme Court precedent on this point. And what we expect to see is EPA saying, no, we want you to just do whatever is cost effective because we think everyone ought to pull their fair share. And that's where the dispute will lie. So we'll see what happens. But certainly, to your point, cost is not only relevant, it is centrally important to the considerations in this plan.
Well, I know the Lignite Energy Council has put up a website, cleanairnd.com, where you can go and get more information about commenting. Any advice for people who are thinking, listen, I got something to say about this. I think I have an important issue to bring forward in this process. What's your advice to them? Where can they go to put their comment?
So I think that's a great place to start. But really, just anyone with access to the internet ought to be able to find DEQ's website and their page on regional page.
That's the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. That's where they can go, as the state department?
Exactly. Yes,
okay.
They can go to the one you just mentioned for the Lignite Energy Council. They've got an easy access way to make sure you're getting to the right spot.
Sure.
But even if you just go directly to the Department of Environmental Quality, all of the information you need to comment is there. And I think it's important to recognize that you don't have to have some sort of special knowledge or insider information to be helpful in commenting. All you really have to have is the ability to take a look at this and say, hey, we see our state doing what is right with regard to setting smart policy on these issues, and recognizing that it doesn't make sense to spend $150 million on new controls that aren't going to change what we see at our parks. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, and that is exactly what DEQ has concluded. And DEQ, I think, would appreciate some support from the general public, even if that's all that you see in the plan. It's available there. They've got an executive summary. It's not too long, very easy to read. take a look at it, see what you think. And if it sounds reasonable to you, and we think it does, we would certainly recommend folks provide some support for it in the form of comments, even if they're fairly minimal.
Well, I think that would be my argument is North Dakota's doing well. We've got a history of making good reductions. We've got our state on path to hit the goal that the EPA has set, the long-term aspirational goal, as you called it. We're on track to hit it. In fact, we're ahead of schedule to hit it. So
that's right.
Let's not fix what's not broken. Let's take some of our federal resources and maybe expend them elsewhere where there's some bigger problems to solve. Thank you so much for your time. Certainly appreciate it. And once again, that's cleanairnd.com. If you want to go, more information about this, obviously this is from the Lignite Energy Council, so it's from their perspective, but it's a good place. I mean, if you want to comment, you want to participate, that's a good place to go and get information. And certainly appreciate your time as well, Mac. Thanks for being on.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.